Jonathan Hale had everything: wealth, power, success. But one taxi ride changed his life forever. A simple ring on the driver's hand revealed a sister he never knew, and a deadly secret their mother died protecting. Now, someone is watching. Someone who will kill to keep the past buried. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. Jonathan Hale stood at the top of his office building, looking down at the city lights of Manhattan. Everything he saw from up here was part of his world. The high-rises, the fancy restaurants, the luxury stores. At 52, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But tonight, something felt empty. "Mr. Hale?" His secretary Betty poked her head into his office. "Your car isn't starting. Tom says it'll be an hour before he can get here with the backup." Jonathan checked his watch. He had a dinner meeting at Le Cirque in 30 minutes. "I'll just grab a taxi," he said, grabbing his coat. Betty frowned. "A taxi? But sir, you haven't taken a taxi in—" "Sometimes change is good," Jonathan cut her off with a smile. If only he knew how true those words would turn out to be. The night air was chilly as Jonathan stood on the curb, raising his hand. Several empty taxis passed him by, their drivers probably ending their shifts. Finally, one pulled over, an older model, a bit beaten up but clean. Jonathan slid into the back seat, adjusting his $1,000 suit. "Le Cirque, please." "Sure thing," the driver said. She was probably in her late 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her voice was kind, tired but warm. As she pulled away from the curb, Jonathan's eyes caught something in the rearview mirror, a flash of gold and blue on her left hand. His heart stopped. The ring, his mother's ring. He would know it anywhere. The delicate gold band, the small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. It wasn't an expensive piece, but it was one of a kind. His father had it custom-made for his mother on their first anniversary. Jonathan's mouth went dry. He remembered the last time he saw that ring, the morning his mother disappeared. He was 22 then, just starting out in business. He'd come down for breakfast, and she was crying at the kitchen table. When he asked what was wrong, she just hugged him tight and said she loved him. By the time he got home that evening, she was gone. The only thing missing from her jewelry box was that ring. "Excuse me," Jonathan said, his voice shaking. "That ring you're wearing?" The driver glanced at her hand. "Oh, this old thing?" She smiled sadly. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed away 5 years ago." Jonathan's world tilted on its axis. "Your mother, what was her name?" The driver hesitated, probably wondering why this rich stranger was asking personal questions. But something in his voice must have touched her, because she answered, "Margaret. Margaret Collins, though that wasn't her real last name. She never talked about her life before she had me. Margaret, his mother's name. Did she—" Jonathan had to clear his throat. "Did she ever mention having another child? Before you?" The taxi swerved slightly as the driver's hands tightened on the wheel. She pulled over to the curb, put the car in park, and turned around to face him fully. "How do you know about that?" Her eyes, green just like his mother's, were wide with shock. "Because," Jonathan said softly, "I think I'm that child. I'm Margaret's son, and if I'm right, you're my sister." Eleanor, he saw her name on the taxi license, stared at him. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her hand went to the ring, twisting it around her finger just like their mother used to do when she was nervous. "Try me," Jonathan said. "Ask me anything about her. Ask me about how she used to sing Moon River while she cooked, about how she collected elephant figurines because she thought they brought good luck, about the scar on her left palm from when she tried to catch a falling knife." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. She said she had to leave someone behind, to protect them, but she never told me from what. "I never knew why she left," Jonathan said. "But I never stopped looking for her. Every private investigator I could hire, but she covered her tracks well." "She was scared of something," Eleanor said. "Someone. Even years later, she'd sometimes look over her shoulder like she was being watched, but she never told me the whole story." Jonathan looked at his sister, and saw in her face echoes of their mother, the same gentle smile, the same worried furrow between her brows. But he also saw the toll of a hard life, The early wrinkles, the calloused hands, the exhaustion in her eyes. "Eleanor," he said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in, but I'd like to know you, to hear about Mom's life with you. And maybe together we can figure out why she had to leave." Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I have so many questions." "So do I," Jonathan said. He pulled out his business card and wrote his personal number on the back. "I'm supposed to be at a dinner meeting right now, but suddenly it doesn't seem very important. There's a diner around the corner. Would you like to get a cup of coffee?" Eleanor stared at the card, at his name embossed in gold letters. "Jonathan Hale," she read. "The Jonathan Hale of Hale Industries?" He nodded. "Does that change things?" She thought for a moment, then smiled, their mother's smile. "No," she said. "No, it doesn't. I'd like that coffee." As they walked to the diner, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in 30 years. Hope. Hope that finally he might understand why his mother left. Hope that even though he couldn't have his mother back, he might have found a family he never knew he had. But what? Neither of them knew was that their reunion had been noticed. Across the street, a man in a dark coat lowered his phone after taking their picture. He dialed a number and waited. "Sir?" "You were right. They've found each other." He paused, listening. "Yes, sir. I understand. I'll keep watching." The man hung up and melted back into the shadows. The past, it seemed, wasn't done with the Hale family yet. The fluorescent lights of Joe's all-night diner cast a harsh glow over the worn red vinyl booths. Jonathan and Eleanor sat across from each other, 2 steaming cups of coffee between them. Neither had touched their drinks. "Start from the beginning," Eleanor said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "What was she like before?" Jonathan leaned back, memories flooding his mind. "She was happy. At least I thought she was. She and Dad had a good marriage. He died when I was 15, car accident. After that, it was just Mom and me." "She never mentioned your father," Eleanor said softly, "but sometimes she'd look at old jewelry boxes like they held secrets. Now I understand, she was probably thinking of him. A waitress came by to refill their cups. When she left, Jonathan asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Eleanor, when were you born?" She smiled sadly. 9 months after Mom left you. January 15th, 1994. She was already pregnant when she ran away, wasn't she?" Jonathan's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "She never told me. Why wouldn't she tell me I was going to have a sister? Maybe for the same reason she ran, to protect us both." Eleanor pulled an old photo from her wallet. "This is the only picture I have of her." Jonathan's hands shook as he took it. His mother looked older than he remembered, her dark hair streaked with grey, but her smile was the same. She was standing in front of a small house, holding a teenage. "Eleanor, where was this taken?" "Millbrook, upstate New York. We moved around a lot when I was little, but we stayed there the longest. Mom worked as a waitress, then a receptionist. She put me through community college working 2 jobs. Eleanor's voice cracked. She never took charity from anyone. She was so proud, so strong. But sometimes at night I'd hear her crying. Jonathan felt tears stinging his own eyes. "Did she ever mention me?" "Not directly, but every year on your birthday she'd light a candle and sit alone in her room. I asked her about it once. She said she was praying for someone she loved to be safe and happy." Eleanor paused. "When was your birthday?" "March 3rd. Eleanor's eyes widened. "That was the day. Every year." The siblings sat in silence, absorbing this new connection. Finally, Jonathan spoke again. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something important. Did Mom ever mention anyone following her? Anyone she was afraid of?" Eleanor's face paled. "There was one incident when I was about 12. A man came to our house asking questions. Mom saw him through the window and went white as a sheet. We packed up and left that night, moved to a different town. She wouldn't tell me why." "What did he look like?" "Tall, well-dressed. He had a scar on his right hand, like a burn. Mom saw it when he knocked on our door, and that's what scared her." Jonathan felt his blood run cold. "Did the scar look like a star?" Eleanor stared at him. "Yes. How did you know?" Before Jonathan could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. His hands shook as he read it. Like mother, like children always running. But you can't run forever. The debt must be paid. He showed it to Eleanor, whose face went white. Jonathan, what's going on? What debt? What did Mom get involved in? I don't know, he said grimly. But I think I know someone who might. My father's old law partner, Richard Whitmore. He handled all our family's legal affairs. If anyone knows why Mom ran, it would be him. Can we trust him? Jonathan hesitated. I've known him my whole life. He's the one who helped me start my business, but he frowned. Now that I think about it, he always changed the subject when I asked about Mom. Said it was better to let the past stay in the past. Eleanor twisted their mother's ring on her finger. Maybe he was right. Maybe we should just leave it alone. Leave it alone? Jonathan's voice rose slightly. Eleanor, we just found each other after 30 years. Mom spent her whole life running, scared. She died carrying this secret. Don't you want to know why? Of course I do. But Mom was terrified of something, Jonathan. Terrified enough to leave her whole life behind, to keep us apart. What if by digging into this, we're putting ourselves in danger? Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand. Whatever Mom was running from, she faced it alone. But now we have each other. We can face it together. Eleanor squeezed his hand back. Okay, she whispered. Where do we start? I'll set up a meeting with Richard. Tomorrow, but tonight? He looked at his sister. It still felt strange to say that word, and smiled. Tonight I want to hear everything about your life. Every single thing I missed. As they talked into the night, sharing stories and memories, neither noticed the black car parked across the street. Inside, the man with the phone was watching. He picked up his phone again. Sir, they're still together, and it looks like they're going to talk to Richard Whitmore. He listened for a moment. Yes, sir, I understand. If Whitmore talks, he's to be dealt with. Permanently. In the diner, Jonathan and Eleanor continued their conversation, unaware that their search for answers had already set dangerous wheels in motion. The truth about their mother's past was about to come to light, but that truth might cost them everything. Richard Whitmore's office hadn't changed in 30 years. The same leather chairs, the same oak desk, even the same picture of him shaking, hands with a former president. But today something felt different. Maybe it was the way Richard's hands shook as he poured his morning scotch. Or maybe it was the fear in his eyes when he saw Jonathan wasn't alone. My God, Richard whispered, staring at Eleanor. You look just like her. Jonathan stepped forward. So you knew. You knew about my sister all along. Richard sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. I knew Margaret was pregnant when she left. I helped her disappear. He took a long drink. I've carried that secret for 3 decades. Your father made me swear on his deathbed to protect you both. Eleanor gripped the arm of her chair. Our father knew. He knew about me. James knew everything. Richard pulled out an old key from his desk drawer. He knew what was coming, that's why he set up the accident. Jonathan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. What are you talking about? Dad died in a car crash. The crash wasn't an accident, Jonathan. Your father staged his own death to protect his family. Richard's voice cracked. But they found out he was alive. They found him in Mexico 2 years later. That's when Margaret knew she had to run. Eleanor stood up, shaking. Who are they? Who was after our parents? Richard walked to his wall safe, his hands trembling as he used the key. Have you ever heard of the Sterling Group? Jonathan frowned. The investment firm? They went bankrupt in the 90s after that big fraud scandal. That's what the public knows. But Sterling was just a front. Your father discovered what they really were, a massive money laundering operation for some very dangerous people, international crime syndicates, corrupt politicians, drug cartels. Richard pulled out a thick file. James was their lawyer. When he found out what they were doing, he gathered evidence, enough to bring down their whole operation. So they tried to kill him, Jonathan said quietly. They would have killed all of you. James faked his death, thinking it would keep you safe. But when they found him, Richard's voice trailed off. Margaret was already pregnant with Eleanor. She knew they would never stop looking, so she ran. Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. She spent her whole life looking over her shoulder, always afraid. The man with the star-shaped scar, Jonathan said. Who is he? Richard went pale. Victor Kane. Sterling Group's enforcer. If you've seen him, you're already in danger. He handed the file to Jonathan. Everything your father gathered is in here, names, dates, transactions. Margaret kept it hidden all these years, waiting for the right time. The right time for what? To finish what your father started, to expose them all. Richard looked at his watch anxiously. You need to leave, now. Take the file and go somewhere safe. Don't tell me where. Jonathan clutched the file. Richard, these people, are they still out there? The Sterling Group officially doesn't exist anymore, but the people behind it, they're more powerful than ever. They've got new names, new companies. If they find out you have this file... A sharp crack split the air. Richard's eyes went wide. A red stain spread across his white shirt as he collapsed. Get down! Jonathan grabbed Eleanor and pulled her behind the desk as another shot shattered the office window. Glass rained down around them. Eleanor was screaming. Jonathan could see Richard's body on the floor, still and bloody. The file had scattered everywhere. The back door, Jonathan gasped. When I say run, run! They heard footsteps on the fire escape outside the broken window. Eleanor clutched Jonathan's arm. We can't leave the file. No time. Jonathan grabbed what papers he could reach. Run, now! They burst through the back door into the hallway. The elevator would take too long. They raced down the emergency stairs, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Behind them, they heard the office door slam open. They emerged in the underground parking garage. Jonathan's car was 3 rows over. Eleanor, take my keys. He shoved them into her hand along with the papers he'd grabbed. Get to the car. I'll lead them away. No. Eleanor grabbed his arm. We stay together. More footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Jonathan made a split-second decision. He grabbed Eleanor's hand and they ran deeper into the garage, ducking between cars. They found a service exit that led to a back alley. Jonathan could hear sirens in the distance. Someone must have reported the shots. This way. They ran down the alley into a crowded street. Jonathan pulled Eleanor into the first taxi they saw. Downtown Marriott, he told the driver, then turned to Eleanor. Are you okay? She was shaking, clutching the crumpled papers to her chest. Richard, they killed him, just like that. I know. Jonathan's hands were shaking too. Let me see what we managed to save. Eleanor handed him the papers. Most were old bank statements, but one caught his eye. A handwritten letter from their father to their mother, dated just days before his accident. As Jonathan read it, his blood ran cold. The truth was worse than he imagined. Much worse. Eleanor, he whispered, we need to find somewhere safe. There's something you need to see. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Should have left the past buried. Now you'll join it. The taxi drove on through the busy streets of New York, carrying the siblings away from one danger and toward another. The truth about their family was starting to emerge from the shadows. But that truth came with a deadly price tag. The hotel room wasn't much, but it was safe. Jonathan had paid cash, used a fake name, and chosen a small place far from his usual luxury hotels. Eleanor sat on the edge of one of the twin beds, still shaking slightly. The evening news played quietly on the TV, showing police cars outside Richard's office building. Are you ready? Jonathan held their father's letter, his hands trembling slightly. Once we read this, there's no going back. Eleanor touched their mother's ring. Mom kept this secret her whole life. She died protecting us from it. Maybe we should... Running didn't save her, Jonathan said quietly. And it won't save us. We need to know the truth. Eleanor nodded. Read it. Jonathan unfolded the letter, yellowed with age, and began to read. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then everything has gone wrong. The accident didn't fool them. They know I'm alive and they're coming for me. But before they find me, you need to know the truth. The Sterling Group isn't just laundering money. They're buying people, judges, politicians, police chiefs, building an invisible empire. I helped them do it. Every contract I wrote, every deal I made, I was helping them take control of our whole system. But that's not the worst of it. They're planning something big. Project Phoenix, I found the files. They're going to crash the entire financial system, then rebuild it with them in control. Thousands will lose everything. But the Sterling Group will own it all. The evidence is in a safety deposit box, number 23117, First National Bank downtown. The key is hidden in the one place they'll never look, inside the sapphire ring I gave you on our first anniversary. The stone unscrews. Margaret, my love, I know you're carrying our second child, a daughter. I've seen the ultrasound pictures you tried to hide. I understand why you didn't tell me. You were trying to protect her, just like I'm trying to protect you all. Tell Jonathan I'm sorry for lying, sorry for dying, but most of all, sorry for what I'm about to ask you to do. You need to run. Take Jonathan and disappear. The evidence. In that safety deposit box is radioactive. Anyone who touches it dies. Richard knows what to do when the time is right. One day, when it's safe, give our daughter the ring. It's not just jewelry, it's the key to exposing everything. I love you all, even the daughter I'll never meet. Forever yours, James. Eleanor was crying openly now. The ring. Mom never took it off, not once. She was protecting it all those years. Jonathan stared at his sister's hand. May I? Eleanor slipped off the ring and handed it to him. Jonathan examined it closely, then carefully tried to unscrew the sapphire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a tiny click, the stone came loose. Inside was a small key. First National Bank, Jonathan whispered. After 30 years, it's still there. Everything Dad died to protect. We can't go to the bank, Eleanor said. They'll be watching it. That's probably how they found Richard. They've been monitoring everyone connected to Dad. Jonathan was about to respond when his phone rang. The number was blocked. Speaker, Eleanor mouthed. Jonathan nodded and answered. Hello, Jonathan. The voice was smooth, cultured. Or should I call you Mr. Hale? I prefer to be formal with people. Before I kill them, Jonathan's hand tightened on the phone. Victor Kane. Very good. I see Richard managed to tell you about me before his unfortunate accident. Such a messy business. I prefer cleaner methods myself. What do you want? The same thing I've wanted for 30 years. The contents of safety deposit box 2317. Kane's voice hardened. Your father died protecting it. Richard died protecting it. Your mother spent her life running from it. How many more people have to die, Jonathan? Eleanor grabbed Jonathan's arm, shaking her head frantically. I don't know what you're talking about, Jonathan said. Kane laughed softly. No? Then why did you book a room at the Hampton Inn under the name John Smith? Yes, we know where you are. We know your sister is with you. Such a touching reunion. Shame it has to end so tragically. They heard footsteps in the hallway outside. You have 1 hour, Kane said. Bring the key to the bank. Open the box. Give us what's inside. Do that. And you both live. Refused. They heard a gun being cocked through the phone. Well, let's just say the cleaning staff will have an unpleasant surprise in room 214. The line went dead. Fire escape, Jonathan whispered. Now. They grabbed their few belongings and ran to the window. As they climbed down the metal stairs, they heard their hotel room door burst open above them. In the alley below, Jonathan's mind raced. They couldn't go. Home. Couldn't go to the police. Kane had said they owned half the force. Couldn't trust anyone. But maybe... Eleanor, he said as they ran through the dark streets. Do you remember that diner? The one where Mom worked in Millbrook? Joe's place? It closed years ago after Mom... Her eyes widened. The hidden basement where she used to let me do my homework. Jonathan nodded. Kane doesn't know about Millbrook. Doesn't know about the diner. We can hide there, figure out our next move. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Jonathan, what Mom and Dad died protecting, we have to finish it, don't we? Yes, he said grimly. But first we have to survive the night. They flagged down a passing cab. As they drove toward the highway, Eleanor looked at the ring in her hand. All those years, she whispered. Mom was right there, serving coffee, living a simple life. But she was really a guardian, protecting this secret, protecting us. Jonathan put his arm around his sister, and now it's our turn to protect each other. Behind them, 2 black SUVs pulled out into traffic, following at a discreet distance. The night was far from over, and somewhere in a bank vault downtown, a 30-year-old secret waited to be uncovered. A secret worth killing for. A secret worth dying for. A secret that was about to change everything. Millbrook hadn't changed much in the past 30 years. The same sleepy main street, the same old-fashioned storefronts, the same church bell tolling the hour. But Joe's place was barely recognizable. The once busy diner was now a boarded-up shell, its neon sign dark and broken. "Mom loved this place," Eleanor said as they forced open the rusty back door. "Joe was like a father to me. He never asked questions about our past, just gave us both jobs and treated us like family." Jonathan shined his flashlight around the abandoned kitchen. "What happened to Joe?" "Died of a heart attack 10 years ago." Eleanor moved some old boxes, revealing a trapdoor. Mom was devastated. She'd finally felt safe here, you know, like she could breathe. The basement was musty but dry. Old Christmas decorations and broken diner equipment lined the walls. In one corner, a small table still stood with a child's chair beside it. "This was my homework spot," Eleanor smiled sadly. "Mom would send down milkshakes while I studied. Said education was my ticket to a better life." She paused. "She wanted me to go to college, but we couldn't afford it. She cried when I decided to drive a taxi instead." Jonathan felt a stab of guilt. While he'd been building his fortune, his sister had been struggling to make ends meet. Their mother had been working double shifts just to get by. "Eleanor," he started, but she cut him off. Don't feel bad about your success. Mom used to read about you in the papers, you know. Every time your company made the news, she'd cut out the article. She was so proud of you." Jonathan's voice cracked. "She knew where I was all along?" "She kept track of you, made sure you were safe, but she never got too close. She was terrified they'd use her to get to you." Eleanor pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. "Look what I found in her things after she died." It was a newspaper clipping about Jonathan winning Entrepreneur of the Year. Written in their mother's handwriting on the margin were the words, "My beautiful boy, still changing the world." Tears rolled down Jonathan's cheeks. All those years, he'd thought she'd abandoned him. She'd been watching over him from afar. A noise upstairs made them both freeze. "Back door's open," a gruff voice said. "Check the basement." Jonathan quickly turned off his flashlight. Eleanor grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a large cabinet. They heard heavy footsteps on the basement stairs. The beam of a flashlight swept the room. Through a crack in the cabinet, Jonathan could see two men in dark suits. One had a gun. "Nothing down here," one man said. "Just old junk. Keep looking. Kane says they've got family history here." Eleanor's grip on Jonathan's arm tightened. Her other hand clutched their mother's ring. The men moved closer to their hiding spot. Jonathan held his breath. One more step, and a flashlight beam would find them. Suddenly, police sirens wailed outside. The men cursed. "Local cops," one said. "Someone must have reported a break-in." Kane said no witnesses. "We can't risk being seen." They heard the men hurry back. Upstairs. Moments later, car doors slammed and an engine roared to life. Jonathan and Eleanor waited 5 more minutes before daring to move. "They'll be back," Jonathan said. "We need to think fast. That safety deposit box is the key to everything, but Kane will have the bank watched." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe we're thinking about this wrong. Mom spent 30 years outsmarting these people. She must have had a plan." "What do you mean?" "The ring, the key, the safety deposit box? It's too obvious. Mom was smarter than that. She would have had a backup plan." Eleanor started pacing. "Think about it. Why this town? Why this diner? She could have hidden anywhere." Jonathan watched his sister, seeing their mother's quick mind at work. "You're right. She chose this place specifically." Eleanor nodded. Joe's place wasn't just a diner to her, it was something else. A safe house, maybe. She looked around the basement with new eyes. "Help me search everything. Mom would have left us something. A message, a clue." They began examining the basement carefully. Jonathan checked the walls while Eleanor went through old boxes. After 20 minutes, they were about to give up when Jonathan noticed something odd about the child's table. "Eleanor, you said this is where you did your homework. Every day after school. Mom insisted I use this specific spot." Jonathan ran his hands along the table's edge. There, a small notch that didn't match the others. He pressed it. With a click, a hidden compartment popped open in the table's leg. Inside was a dusty envelope addressed to my children. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened it. Another letter written in their mother's handwriting. My darling Jonathan and Eleanor, if you're reading this, then you've found each other at last, and you know about your father's evidence. Cain and his people will be watching the bank, expecting you to walk into their trap. But your father was cleverer than they knew. The safety deposit box is a decoy. The real evidence is somewhere they'd never think to look, somewhere only a mother would think to hide it. Eleanor, remember the story of Hansel and Gretel? How I used to read it to you every night. Remember what I always said about breadcrumbs, Jonathan? You have your father's mind for business. Helena, you have my instinct for survival. Together, you'll figure it out. I love you both more than life itself. I'm sorry I had to keep you apart. But now you can finish what your father started. Just remember, sometimes the best hiding place is right in plain sight. All my love, Mom. Eleanor looked up at Jonathan. Hansel and Gretel? Breadcrumbs? She's left us a trail, Jonathan said. But where does it start? Before Eleanor could answer, they heard more cars pulling up outside. No sirens this time. Cain's men are back, Jonathan whispered. And this time they've brought reinforcements. They were trapped in the basement of an abandoned diner, holding a cryptic clue from their mother, while armed men closed in above them. But for the first time, they weren't just running from the past. They were following their mother's trail into the future. If they could survive long enough to solve her final puzzle. Heavy footsteps creaked on the floorboards above. Jonathan and Eleanor huddled in the darkness of the basement, their mother's letter clutched between them. Back door's clear, a voice called from upstairs. Check every room, Cain wants them found. Eleanor's mind raced. Hansel and Gretel, breadcrumbs, she whispered. Then her eyes widened. The library? What? Jonathan whispered back. Mom used to take me to the children's library every Saturday. She'd read me Hansel and Gretel from this beautiful old book, but she always checked out the same copy, even when there were newer ones available. More footsteps above, getting closer to the basement door. There's a storm drain, Eleanor continued quickly. Behind the diner, it leads to the alley. We used it once when Mom thought someone was following us. Jonathan nodded. They crept to the far corner of the basement, where Eleanor pointed out a rusty grate. It took both of them to lift it quietly. The tunnel was narrow and damp. They crawled through darkness, trying not to think about what else might be down there. After what felt like forever, they emerged in an alley behind the neighboring buildings. The library's 3 blocks away, Eleanor said. But we can't just walk there, they'll be watching the streets. Jonathan peered around the corner. 2 black SUVs were parked in front of the diner. Men in dark suits were questioning an elderly couple who had been walking by. The rooftops, he said. These old buildings all connect. Dad used to tell me stories about running across rooftops when he was young. I never knew he was probably speaking from experience. They found a fire escape and climbed up. True to Jonathan's word, the flat roofs of the old storefronts formed an uneven but passable path. Mom always said the best escape route is the one nobody looks for, Eleanor said as they carefully made their way across. She taught me to think in 3 dimensions, up, down, and sideways. They reached the library 10 minutes later, dropping down into its back parking lot. The building was closed for the night, dark and silent. Now what? Jonathan asked. Eleanor smiled. Mom also taught me useful skills, like how to pick locks. She pulled 2 bobby pins from her hair and went to work on the back door. Minutes later, they were inside. The children's section was on the first floor. Eleanor went straight to a specific shelf and pulled out a worn copy of Hansel and Gretel. This is it. This is the copy she always chose. She opened it carefully. There has to be something. The book seemed normal at first glance, but when Eleanor held it up to the moonlight streaming through the window, they saw tiny marks in the margins. Numbers. Page numbers, Jonathan realized. She's marked specific pages. They quickly turned to the marked pages. Certain words had been underlined so faintly you'd never notice unless you were looking for them. Page 12. Secret. Page 27. Beneath. Page 45. Stone. Page 63. Angel. The cemetery, Eleanor gasped. Mum used to take me there to put flowers on Joe's grave. There's a big angel statue near his plot. Jonathan was about to respond when lights swept across the library windows. More black SUVs. How did they find us? Eleanor shoved the book back on the shelf. They didn't, Jonathan said grimly. They're searching everywhere systematically. We need to move. The cemetery's on the other side of town, Eleanor said. We'll never make it on foot without being seen. Jonathan looked around desperately. Through the window he could see the library's small parking lot, and there, under a broken security light, was an old maintenance truck. Can you hotwire a car like you pick locks? Eleanor's smile was answer enough. Minutes later, they were driving through Millbrook's back streets in the borrowed truck, staying away from main roads. The cemetery was dark and silent when they arrived. Joe's grave is this way. Eleanor led them through the moonlit paths. The angel statue, there. A massive stone angel stood guard over a section of older graves. Its face was worn by time, but its wings still spread majestically over those it watched. Secret beneath stone angel, Jonathan repeated the clues. There must be something under the statue. They examined the base of the angel. Eleanor found a loose stone block and pulled it free. Behind it was a small metal box. Inside was a USB drive and another note in their mother's handwriting. My clever children, if you've found this, you've already learned to work together. The drive contains everything your father collected, plus 30 years of my own investigation. Names, dates, accounts, everything needed to bring down the Sterling Group and everyone behind it. But be careful. Kane isn't the only one you need to fear. The organization has a new leader now, someone who hides in plain sight, someone who's been watching Jonathan for years, waiting. Look closely at your own company, Jonathan, at who helped you build it. Some friends are really enemies in disguise. All my love, Mom. Jonathan felt cold. My company, Richard helped me start it. He introduced me to all my initial investors, including Marcus Sterling, Eleanor said quietly. I remember reading about him in the business section. He was your first major backer. Marcus Sterling, Jonathan's voice was hollow. Son of the man who founded the Sterling Group, the man who ordered our father's death. He ran his hands through his hair. I let them get close to me. All these years they've been watching, waiting. A twig snapped nearby. They spun around to see shadows moving between the graves. The beam of a flashlight swept past them. Found them, a voice shouted. By the angel! Jonathan grabbed Eleanor's hand. Run! They fled deeper into the cemetery as gunshots shattered the night silence. The USB drive felt like it was burning. In Jonathan's pocket, 30 years of secrets finally brought to light. But the most shocking revelation was still to come, because Marcus Sterling wasn't just Jonathan's investor. He was also his soon-to-be father-in-law, and his daughter, Jonathan's fiancée Claire, was hosting a charity gala tomorrow night where all the major players would be present, including her father. They had the evidence, they had the names. Now they just needed a plan, and time was running out. Dawn found Jonathan and Eleanor in a small motel on the outskirts of town, paid for with cash under a false name. Jonathan sat on the edge of his bed staring at a photo on his phone. It showed him and Claire Sterling at their engagement party 6 months ago. She was beautiful, laughing, her diamond ring catching the light. Had it all been a lie? How long have you been engaged? Eleanor asked softly. A year. Jonathan's voice was hollow. Marcus Sterling approached me 5 years ago, offering to invest in my company. He introduced me to Claire at a business dinner, said it was just a coincidence she was there. He laughed bitterly. Nothing was a coincidence, was it? They've been playing me from the start. Eleanor sat beside her brother. Did you love her? I thought I did. Jonathan's hands shook as he turned off his phone. But now I'm wondering if I ever really knew her. Was she part of it? Did she know who I really was when she agreed to marry me? His phone buzzed with a text. It was from Claire. Darling, where are you? Father says you missed an important meeting. And why aren't you answering his calls? The gala is tonight. You know how important this is for the family. Please call me. The family, Jonathan said. The same family that killed our father, that forced our mother to live in fear, that made us grow up apart. Eleanor was examining their mother's USB drive on her laptop. "Jonathan, look at this. Mom didn't just collect evidence about the past. She kept tracking them. Every new company they created, every politician they bought." She pointed to a file, including details about tonight's gala. "What about it?" "It's not just a charity event. According to Mom's notes, it's a cover for something bigger. Project Phoenix is happening tonight." Eleanor's voice shook. "They're going to crash the market tomorrow, but first, they're gathering to celebrate, all the major players in one room." "A perfect trap," Jonathan said. "They're all there, feeling safe, surrounded by their wealthy friends. The perfect time to expose everything," Eleanor finished. "But how do we get in? They'll be watching for you now." Jonathan's eyes fell on the society pages open on Eleanor's laptop, specifically on a photo of Claire at last year's gala wearing a stunning red gown. "No," he said slowly. "They won't be watching for me, because I'm going to be exactly where they expect me to be, by my fiancé's side." Eleanor stared at him. "You can't be serious. It's too dangerous. It's our only chance. Kane's men are looking for us together, searching back streets and hiding places. They won't expect me to walk right through the front door of the Sterling mansion." He picked up his phone. "I'm going to call Claire, tell her I've been busy with work, lost track of time, that I'll be there tonight. They'll kill you if they realize you know. Not in front of 500 of New York's elite. Marcus Sterling has spent decades building his public image as a philanthropist. He won't risk it." Jonathan started typing on Eleanor's laptop. "But we need to be smart about this. While I'm inside, you'll be our backup." Over the next hours, they planned carefully. Jonathan would attend the gala as expected, wearing a wire Eleanor had rigged from old radio parts. She would park nearby in a borrowed car, monitoring everything through the wire while downloading the USB drive's contents to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. "The evidence goes public at exactly 10 p.m., Eleanor said. "That's when Mom's files show they're planning to meet in Marcus's study to finalize tomorrow's market crash. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late." Jonathan straightened his tie, the same one he'd been wearing when this all started just days ago. "Eleanor, if something goes wrong..." She hugged him fiercely. "Nothing will go wrong. We've got Mom and Dad watching over us." Jonathan touched the wire hidden under his shirt. "The irony is I was going to break up with Claire anyway. Something never felt right. Now I know why." "Just be careful," Eleanor said. "These people killed Richard without hesitation. They won't blink at adding you to their body count." Jonathan's phone buzzed again. "Claire, darling, Father wants to know what time you're arriving. He says he has something important to discuss with you before the gala." Jonathan took a deep breath and replied, "On my way now. Can't wait to see you both." He turned to Eleanor. "Mom spent 30 years protecting this evidence. Dad died for it. Now we finish it." "Together," Eleanor said firmly. "Even if we're apart tonight, we do this together." As Jonathan headed for the door, Eleanor called out, "Wait." She slipped their mother's ring off her finger. "Take it for luck." Jonathan put the ring in his pocket, next to his heart. In 12 hours, either they would succeed in exposing everything, or they would likely both be dead. But as he drove toward the Sterling mansion, another possibility haunted him. What if Claire really did love him? What if she was as much a victim of her father's lies as he was? He was about to find out, because Claire was waiting at the mansion's front door wearing red, looking as beautiful as ever, and beside her stood her father, Marcus Sterling, smiling the same smile he'd worn the day he'd first introduced Jonathan to his daughter, the same smile he'd probably worn when he ordered Jonathan's father killed. "Jonathan, darling," Claire called out, "we've been so worried." Jonathan forced himself to smile back as he climbed the mansion's steps. With each step, he felt the weight of their mother's ring in his pocket, the ring that had started everything, the ring that would end it all tonight. The Sterling mansion's grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and wealthy guests. Jonathan stood by the champagne fountain, Claire's hand tucked into his arm, watching Marcus Sterling work the crowd. Every smile, every handshake represented another person whose life savings would be wiped out tomorrow, unless Jonathan and Eleanor succeeded. "You're quiet tonight, darling," Claire said, squeezing his arm. "Is everything all right?" Jonathan forced himself to smile. "Just tired. It's been a long week." I know what you mean. Claire sipped her champagne. Daddy's been so tense lately. Business troubles, he says, but tonight we'll fix everything. She kissed his cheek. I'm just glad you're here. Her kiss felt like a knife in his heart. Even now, watching her, he couldn't tell if she was part of the deception or another victim. Serve it. The wire under his shirt crackled softly. Helena's voice came through his hidden earpiece. The files are uploaded and ready. Major news outlets will get them at exactly 10 p.m. Are you close to the study? Jonathan checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. He needed to get upstairs to Marcus's private study before the meeting started. Excuse me, sweetheart, he told Claire. I need to use the restroom. As he headed for the grand staircase, he heard a familiar voice. Mr. Hale. Victor Kane stepped out of the shadows, elegant in a black tuxedo that didn't quite hide the gun holster under his jacket. Going somewhere? Just the restroom, Jonathan said calmly, though his heart was racing. Third door on the right, Kane smiled coldly. Don't get lost. There are sensitive areas upstairs, private areas. Of course. Jonathan started up the stairs, feeling Kane's eyes on his back. In his earpiece, Eleanor whispered, Be careful. He suspects something. Jonathan found the bathroom and locked himself inside. Eleanor, Kane's here and he's watching me. 15 minutes until the files go public. You need to get to that study and plant the bug before they start their meeting. Jonathan splashed water on his face, trying to think. Then he heard voices in the hallway, Marcus Sterling and several others. Gentlemen, shall we discuss business? Marcus was saying. The study will be more private. Footsteps passed the bathroom. Jonathan waited a few seconds, then peered out. The hallway was empty. They'd already gone into the study, but Kane stood at the bottom of the stairs watching. Eleanor, Jonathan whispered. I can't get close. Kane's blocking my way. There was a pause, then, Leave it to me. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the mansion. Fire strobes flashed, and sprinklers activated in parts of the building. Chaos erupted downstairs. Women screamed as water ruined expensive dresses. Men shouted about their suits. Kane looked up at the commotion, then hurried to help with crowd control. Now! Eleanor's voice urged. I hacked their security system, but it won't distract them for long. Jonathan slipped down the hall to the study door. Inside, he could hear angry voices. What the hell is going on? Marcus demanded. Sir, we need to evacuate, a security guard said. Fire protocol. This is too important. Everyone stay, but his. Guests were already leaving, hurrying to save their designer clothes from the sprinklers. Jonathan pressed himself into an alcove as they filed out. Marcus was last, pausing to lock the study door. The moment he disappeared down the hall, Jonathan picked the lock using the skills Eleanor had taught him. The study was massive, wood-paneled, with a wall of security monitors. Jonathan quickly planted the bug under Marcus's desk, next to the computer. Done, he whispered to Eleanor. How long? 5 minutes until the files go public. Get back downstairs before what, Mr. Hale? Jonathan spun around. Claire stood in the doorway, still perfectly dry. She must have followed him up. Claire, Save it. Her voice was different now, harder, colder. Did you really think we wouldn't be watching you? That we wouldn't know the moment you found your sister? Jonathan's blood ran cold. You knew, all along? Of course I knew. About Eleanor, about your mother, all of it. Daddy told me everything when he chose you as my target. She pulled a small pistol from her evening purse. I just couldn't figure out why you came tonight until now. In Jonathan's earpiece, Eleanor was saying something urgent, but he couldn't focus on it. He stared at the woman he'd thought he loved. Was any of it real? He asked quietly. Something flickered in Claire's eyes. Parts of it, more than there should have been. That's what makes this so hard. She raised the gun. Where's the drive, Jonathan? Claire, listen to me. Your father is about to destroy thousands of lives, innocent people, necessary sacrifices. The world is changing tonight. Project Phoenix will usher in a new order. Her hand trembled slightly. I did love you, Jonathan. Remember that. Claire, please. A gunshot cracked through the room. Jonathan flinched, but it was Claire who crumpled to the floor. Behind her stood Eleanor, holding a security guard's weapon. Found this downstairs, Eleanor said grimly. Figured you might need backup. Claire lay groaning, clutching her shoulder. Blood stained her red dress darker. 1 minute until the files. Go public, Eleanor said. We need to move now. They ran for the stairs but stopped short. Marcus Sterling and Victor Kane were charging up, guns drawn. Jonathan, Marcus roared. What have you done to my daughter? Kane raised his weapon. Jonathan grabbed Eleanor and pulled her back into the study. Fire escape. Eleanor pointed to the window. They could see the metal stairs just outside. Bullets splintered the door frame as they scrambled onto the fire escape. Below them, party. Guests scattered at the sound of gunfire. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Jonathan's phone buzzed. A news alert. Breaking, major financial conspiracy exposed. Sterling Group implicated in decades of fraud. Eleanor grinned as they climbed. Down. Right on time, but they weren't safe yet. Kane and Sterling had reached the window, still shooting. A bullet grazed Jonathan's arm, then a voice rang out below. Police, drop your weapons. Squad cars surrounded the mansion. Officers poured out, guns drawn. Marcus Sterling stared at his phone, face ashen as he read the news. 30 years of secrets, exposed at last. The king had fallen. The truth was out. Justice, so long delayed, had finally arrived. But Jonathan wasn't. Thinking about justice as ambulances screamed up the driveway, he was watching paramedics load Claire into one, wondering if love could ever be real in a world built on lies. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Mom would be proud of us. Jonathan touched, the ring in his pocket. Both, Mom and Dad. Above them, the mansion's lights blazed against the night sky, illuminating the end of one era and the beginning of another. But the night wasn't over yet, because Victor Kane had disappeared in the chaos, and he never left loose, ends untied. The emergency room buzzed with activity as doctors treated Claire's shoulder wound. Jonathan and Eleanor sat in the waiting area, being questioned by FBI agents. Outside, news vans were already gathering. The Sterling scandal was exploding across every network. Mr. Hale, one agent said, we'll need you to come in tomorrow for a formal statement. The evidence you provided, it's bigger than anyone imagined. Half the state government is implicated. Jonathan barely heard him. He was watching through the emergency room windows as Claire was treated. Even now, part of him wanted to go to her. Eleanor touched his arm. She made her choices, Jonathan. I know. He pulled out their mother's ring, studying it in the harsh hospital lights. I thought when all this was over I'd feel better. Instead, Mr. Hale, a nurse, approached. Miss Sterling is asking for you. Eleanor gripped his hand. Be careful. Jonathan followed the nurse to Claire's bed. She lay there, pale but composed, her red dress replaced by a hospital gown. Her shoulder was heavily bandaged. Your sister has good aim, Claire said quietly. An inch lower and I'd be dead. That wasn't the goal. Jonathan stayed at the foot of her bed. We just wanted the truth. The truth? Claire laughed bitterly. You want the truth, Jonathan? Here it is. I was 17 when Daddy told me about your family, about how your father had betrayed everyone by gathering evidence, about how your mother ran with it. She met his eyes. He said it was my duty to the family to get close to you, to watch you, to make sure you never learned the truth. And you agreed? I was 17. Daddy was my hero. The man who gave me everything. Tears filled her eyes. But then I met you, really met you, and you were nothing like he said. You were kind and genuine and... She looked away. I tried to stop loving you. I couldn't. Jonathan's throat felt tight. You still chose them. Tonight, in the study. I chose survival. Do you know what Daddy does to traitors? Her voice shook. But I hesitated, didn't I? When I had the gun on you, I hesitated. Before Jonathan could respond, alarms began blaring through the hospital. Security guards ran past the door. Eleanor appeared, face pale. Jonathan, Kane's here. He just killed 2 guards in the parking garage. Claire struggled to sit up. Go. He won't stop until you're both dead. Gunshots echoed from the hallway. Screams followed. Back exit, Claire said urgently. Through the staff lounge, here. She pulled an ID card from her purse. It'll open the security doors. Jonathan stared at her. Why are you helping us? Because I loved you, she whispered. For real. And that has to count for something. More gunshots, closer now. Eleanor grabbed Jonathan's arm. We have to move. They ran through the staff lounge to the back exit. Behind them, they heard Kane's voice. Where are they? Claire's voice, clear and firm. They ran toward the main entrance. Hurry! The ID card. Worked. They emerged into the cool night air behind the hospital. Eleanor's borrowed car was nearby. She lied to him, Eleanor said as they drove away. She bought us time. Jonathan clutched their mother's ring. I know. They drove through dark streets, but where could they go? Kane would check their homes, hotels, anywhere obvious. The diner, Eleanor said suddenly. Mom's diner. He already found us there once. Exactly. He won't expect us to go back, and she smiled grimly. I found something else in that basement while you were at the gala. Something Mom left. Something that might help us stop Kane for good. Jonathan's phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Kane killed the guards who tried to stop him. He's killed so many people over the years. Daddy called him his cleaner, but there's something you need to know. Something about the night your father died. Kane kept proof. Insurance, he called it. It's in a safe in his house. The combination is your birthday, Jonathan. He's obsessed with your family. Always has been. Be careful. And I'm sorry. For everything. Eleanor read the message over his shoulder. Kane's house, it could be a trap. Of course. It's a trap. But it's also our chance to end this. Jonathan turned to his sister. What did you find in the basement? Eleanor's eyes gleamed in the darkness. Mom didn't just hide evidence about the Sterling group. She gathered evidence about Kane, too. Every murder, every crime. And she found something else, his weakness. What weakness? Kane has a daughter, too. One nobody knows about. Mom found her. She's been watching over her just like she watched over you. Eleanor pulled out an old photo. Her name is Sarah, and she thinks her father died 20 years ago. Jonathan studied the photo. Where is she now? Living upstate, working as a teacher. Eleanor's voice hardened. Kane doesn't know we know about her, but if he threatens us again, we threaten what he loves most, Jonathan finished. He looked at his sister. We're not really going to hurt an innocent woman. Of course not, we're not him. But Kane doesn't know that. Eleanor smiled, their mother's smile. Sometimes the best weapon isn't a gun, it's the truth. They drove on through the night, heading for Kane's house. In Jonathan's pocket, their mother's ring pressed against his heart. One last secret to uncover. One last battle to fight. Behind them, police cars raced toward the hospital. News helicopters circled the Sterling mansion. And somewhere in the darkness, Victor Kane was hunting them. But this time, they were hunting him too. And they had one. Thing he didn't. Each other. The truth. And a mother's final gift. The knowledge of his greatest fear. The end game was about to begin. Kane's house sat alone on a dark street. Its windows like empty eyes watching the night. Jonathan and Eleanor crouched behind a hedge studying the security system. Mom's notes say he lives alone, Eleanor whispered. No staff, no witnesses, just like Dad's murder. Jonathan checked the gun they'd taken from the hospital security guard. Ready? Eleanor touched their mother's ring, now back on her finger. Together, they moved toward the house, using the security bypass codes from their mother's files. The front door opened silently. Inside, the house was a museum of wealth and power. Expensive art, pristine furniture, everything perfect. Too perfect. He's waiting for us, Jonathan said softly. Of course I am. Kane's voice came from the shadows. Lights flicked on, revealing him in an armchair, gun aimed steadily. I've been waiting for this moment for 30 years. Drop the gun, Eleanor said, or everyone learns about Sarah. Kane's face didn't change, but his trigger finger twitched. What did you say? Your daughter, Jonathan said. The one you've kept hidden all these years. The one who thinks you're dead. Mom found her, Eleanor continued. Protected her, just like she protected us. One word from us, and Sarah learns everything about her father. Every murder, every crime. You're bluffing, but Kane's voice shook slightly. Try us. Jonathan stepped forward. It's over, Kane. The Sterling Group is finished. Marcus is in custody. Claire turned on you. You've lost everything, just like you made us lose everything. Kane's laugh was hollow. Lost everything? You have no idea what loss is. Your father destroyed my life when he gathered that evidence. My wife left me, took my daughter, told her I was dead. His eyes burned with decades of hate. So I made sure he died for real. Made it slow. Made him suffer. Jonathan's hand tightened on his gun, but Eleanor touched his arm. That's why you kept proof, she said. Not just insurance against the Sterlings. You wanted someone to know what you did, wanted to brag about it. The safe, Jonathan said. Where is it? Kane smiled coldly. Behind that painting. Your birthday is the code. Ironic, isn't it? The day you came into this world is the combination I used after taking your father out of it. Open it, Eleanor commanded. Or what? You'll shoot me? Kane stood slowly, his gun unwavering. You're not killers. Not like me. That's why you'll lose. Just like your father lost. Just like your mother. A shot rang out. But it didn't come from Jonathan or Eleanor. Kane's eyes widened. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest, then turned toward the doorway. Claire stood there, pale but steady, holding a gun. Her hospital gown was covered by a coat, her injured shoulder clearly causing pain. That's for my father, she said quietly. For making me into someone I didn't want to be. Kane staggered, his gun dropping, but he lunged for a hidden button on his chair. Suddenly, metal shutters slammed down over the windows. Fire erupted from hidden panels in the walls. If I die, Kane gasped. You? All burn with me. Smoke filled the room. Eleanor ran to the safe, spinning the dial with Jonathan's birthday. Inside was a USB drive, files and photos, Kane's trophy collection from decades of killing. The doors are sealed, Claire cried, pulling at them uselessly. The fire spread rapidly. Kane had prepared his house to become a tomb. Smoke turned the air thick and black. Jonathan grabbed Eleanor's hand. The wine cellar. Every house like this has outside access. 4 deliveries. They ran downstairs, dragging a wounded Claire with them. Kane's laughter followed them, turning into coughs as the smoke consumed him. The cellar doors were locked, but together they managed to break through. They stumbled out, into the night air as Kane's house became an inferno. Sirens wailed in the distance. Claire collapsed onto the grass, coughing. Why? Jonathan asked her. Why did you come? Because you showed me there's more to life than family loyalty, she whispered. That real love means doing what's right, not what's expected. She looked at Eleanor. Take care of him. Police cars and fire trucks roared up. As paramedics took Claire away again, Eleanor handed Jonathan the evidence from Kane's safe. It's over, she said softly. Really over. Jonathan stared at the burning house. Dad can rest now, and Mom knew we'd find each other. Eleanor squeezed his hand, knew we'd finish what they started. Later that night, they sat in their mother's old diner. The police had finished questioning them. Kane's body had been found in the ruins of his house. The evidence he'd kept would put Marcus Sterling away forever. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Jonathan looked around the empty diner, at the table where Eleanor had done her homework, at the counter where their mother had served coffee and kept her secrets. Now we rebuild, he said, starting with this place. Eleanor's eyes widened. What? I'm thinking. A chain of diners, called Margaret's Place. Good food, fair prices, and a place where anyone can feel safe. He smiled. Mom would have liked that. A millionaire and a taxi driver, running diners? Eleanor laughed. A brother and sister, Jonathan corrected. Honoring their mother's memory. Eleanor touched their mother's ring. She kept us apart to keep us safe, but she left us everything we needed to find each other again. Outside, dawn was breaking over Millbrook. The same sun their mother had watched for 30 years, keeping her lonely vigil, protecting her children until they could protect each other. Jonathan put his arm around his sister. Let's go home. We are home, Eleanor said softly. Right here. Where Mum's story ended and ours began, they stayed until sunrise, sharing memories of a mother they'd known in different ways, planning a future she'd died protecting. The ring glinted on Eleanor's finger, no longer a symbol of secrets but of family reunited, and somewhere they knew Margaret and James were smiling. Their children had found each other. The truth had come to light. Justice had been served, and love, real love, the kind that survives secrets and separation, the kind that chooses right over easy, truth over comfort, that love had won in the end, just as their mother had always believed it would. The end.